You dropped a nickel into a slot. You turned a small brass knob. A glass door swung open and there was a slice of lemon meringue pie waiting for you, like it had been waiting your whole life. That was the automat. There were 165 of them. They fed 700,000 Americans every single day, and nobody under 50 has ever heard of them. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. The wall. You have to start with the wall. If you ever walked into a Horn and Hardart Automat, the first thing you saw was a wall of glass. Hundreds of small square windows stacked floor to ceiling like the world's most beautiful filing cabinet. Behind each window, a single piece of food, macaroni and cheese in a small ceramic dish, a slice of pie on a white plate, a bowl of baked beans, a sandwich on rye, each one perfectly placed behind its own glass door, lit from above by a soft, warm bulb that made the food glow like it was holy. You walked up to that wall. You stood there, you looked at it, and you could not believe what you were seeing. A whole restaurant behind glass. A whole world waiting for you to choose. And all you needed was a nickel. 1 nickel. 5 cents. The same coin that bought a newspaper or a phone call. That nickel could buy you a cup of coffee from a brass dolphin, or a slice of pie behind a glass door, or a plate of baked beans that had been simmering since dawn. The automat was the first time in your life you understood that a small amount of money in your hand could buy you something that felt like the future. You walked up to the woman in the glass booth first, the nickel thrower. That was her job, and that was her title, and there was nothing else like her on earth. She sat behind a small window in a brass cage with a marble counter in front of her, and she wore rubber tips on her fingers because she handled coins all day long. You handed her a quarter, and she counted out 5 nickels in one motion without looking. She slid them across the marble, and she smiled. In that smile was the entire promise of the automat. The promise that you were welcome, that nobody was going to ask who you were, that your money was good here, no matter who you were, where you came from, or what you were wearing. There was no host. There were no waiters. There was no menu to be turned away from, just a wall of glass, a stack of nickels, and a marble table somewhere in the room with your name on it. You took your nickels and you walked to the wall. You walked slowly because there was so much to look at. The pies, the puddings, the Salisbury steak swimming in dark gravy, the creamed spinach in its tiny dish, the baked apple with cinnamon on top, the lemon meringue pie with its perfect peaks of toasted white. You pressed your face close to the glass like a child at a bakery window. Your breath fogged the glass, you wiped it with your sleeve, and you saw it again. The PIE, the one you wanted, the one you had been thinking about all morning. You slid your nickel into the slot next to the window. You turned the small brass knob, the door swung open, and you reached in and you took the plate. The door closed behind your hand and you stood there for a second holding the warm plate, and you could not believe how easy it had been. No talking, no ordering, no waiting, no tipping, just you and the food and a piece of marble somewhere to sit down and eat it. And the coffee came from a wall on the side of the room, a long marble wall with brass dolphins built into it, real dolphins, not pictures of dolphins, sculpted brass heads with their mouths open, and a small brass spout coming out of the mouth, and the coffee came out of the spout into your cup. You put your nickel in, you held your cup under the dolphin's mouth, you pressed a small lever, the coffee poured out, hot and fresh and dark. The smell hit you, steam rose up into your face, and you stood there for a moment with that warm cup in your hand, and you understood that somebody somewhere had decided that even the simplest cup of coffee deserved to be poured from the mouth of a brass dolphin. Joseph Horn had seen those dolphins in Italy on a trip he took before the first automat opened. He came home and he said, "That is how we will pour the coffee, from dolphins." Because the coffee deserves it. Because the people who drink it deserve it. That coffee cost 1 nickel from 1902 until 1950, 48 years. 2 world wars, the Great Depression, the Spanish flu, the Roaring Twenties, Prohibition, Hoover, Roosevelt, Truman, the atom bomb. Through all of it, the coffee at the automat cost 1 nickel. Your grandfather paid 1 nickel. Your father paid 1 nickel. Your mother on her first date in 1946 paid 1 nickel. And then on November 29, 1950, the price doubled to 2 nickels, 10 cents. It was front page news in New York City, front page, because the nickel coffee at the automat was so woven into the fabric of American life that when it went up by a single coin, the whole country noticed. Your grandfather sat at the kitchen table that morning with the newspaper. He read the headline, he shook his head, and he said, "This is the end of something," and he was right. He just did not know how right. The automat was the only place in America that did not care who you were. There was no host to look you up and down. There was no waiter to decide if you were worth serving. There was no table reserved for the people who looked the right way. There was just the wall of glass, the brass dolphins, the marble tables, and your nickel was as good as anyone else's nickel. A millionaire could sit at a marble table eating his lemon meringue pie next to a man who had not eaten in 2 days. They both ate the same pie and they both drank the same coffee, and nobody looked twice. In an America that was still segregated, in an America where black people could be turned away from most restaurants, in an America where a poor man could be told to leave a hotel lobby just for sitting down, the automat said, come in and eat. Your money is good here. Sit wherever you want. Stay as long as you want. Nobody is going to bother you. That was the miracle of the automat, and nobody who experienced it ever forgot what it felt like. During the Great Depression, the automat saved lives. The coffee was a nickel, the food was cheap, and there was free hot water and free ketchup at every table. Men who had lost their jobs, their homes, and everything they had would come into the automat with 1 nickel in their pocket. They would buy a cup of coffee, sit at a marble table, take a glass of free hot water, mix it with the free ketchup, drink it, and call it tomato soup. That was their dinner. The automat knew. The managers saw what was happening. They never said a word. They never asked anyone to leave. The hot water stayed free, the ketchup stayed free, the marble table stayed open to anyone with a nickel. For 10 years, through the worst economy in American history, the automat fed people who could not afford to be fed and never made them feel like beggars while doing it. That is who Horn and Hardart were. That is what the automat was for. During the Second World War, the automat became something else. It became the place where soldiers came when they had a few hours of leave in New York City. The Times Square automat was full of uniforms day and night. Boys from Iowa, Oklahoma, and Tennessee who had never been east of the Mississippi sat at marble tables eating lemon meringue pie, drinking nickel coffee, talking to girls they had just met, writing letters home, and looking up at the chrome paneling, the stained glass windows, and the vaulted ceilings, trying to remember every detail because they did not know if they would ever come back. Some of them did not. Some of them shipped out from New York Harbor the next morning and never came home. The last hot meal they ate in America was a slice of pie from behind a glass door at the automat in Times Square. Their mothers never knew that. Their wives never knew that. But somewhere in a marble dining room on a Tuesday night in 1943, a boy from Kansas finished his pie, stood up, and walked out into Times Square, and that was the last time he ever ate at a table. The automat carried that weight. The automat held those moments. The children. You have to talk about the children. Because for a generation of kids growing up in Philadelphia and New York, the automat was magic. Real, actual magic. You walked in with your mother on a Saturday afternoon, and you stood in front of that wall of glass, and your mother gave you a nickel, and she said, pick something, pick anything. And you stood there for 10 minutes deciding because the decision was yours. You were 5 years old, and the decision was yours. The pie or the pudding, the cookie or the cupcake, the milk or the chocolate milk, and whatever you picked, you put your nickel in the slot, and you turned the knob and the door swung open and you reached in like you were taking treasure out of a treasure chest, and your mother smiled because she remembered the first time her mother had taken her here and given her a nickel and let her choose. 3 generations of Americans grew up choosing pie at the automat. There is a children's book from 1967 called The Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler about 2 kids who run away from home and live in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and they survive by eating at the automat with coins they fish out of the museum fountain. Every kid who read that book wanted to live in a museum and eat at the automat. That was the dream. That was what the automat meant to a child. There was a radio show called the Horn and Hardart Children's Hour. It started in 1927 in Philadelphia. Every Sunday morning, real children sang and danced and recited poetry on the air, sponsored by the automat. And the children who came on that show became famous. Bernadette Peters started there. Frankie Avalon started there. Rosemary Clooney started there. Gregory Hines started there. Madeline Kahn started there. The automat was not just feeding America. The automat was launching the people who would become the voices and the faces of American entertainment for the next 50 years. All of it from a children's radio show sponsored by a restaurant chain that ran on nickels. At its peak in the 1940s, the automat fed 700,000 people every day. 700,000 per day. There were 165 locations, most of them in New York and Philadelphia. They were the largest restaurant operation in the world, bigger than anything that came before, and bigger than McDonald's would be when it was born. The automat did it without a single waiter, without a single menu, without a single host, just a wall of glass, a stack of nickels, and a brass dolphin pouring coffee. Then America moved. After the war, the families that had eaten at the automat for 3 generations packed up and moved to the suburbs. They bought houses with driveways. They bought cars. They stopped walking to the automat for lunch because there was no automat in their new neighborhood, and there never would be. The automat needed dense city streets. It needed people walking past on their lunch break. It needed the foot traffic of 1 million workers and shoppers and tourists every day. And when the city emptied out, the automat had nothing left to feed. Then the coin slots failed. Inflation came in the 1970s, and every time the company needed to raise the price of a sandwich, they had to physically retool the slot mechanism in every single window in every single restaurant. A pie that cost 20 cents in 1965 needed to cost 40 cents by 1975, and the slot was built for 2 coins, not 4. The brass and glass machinery that had been the future in 1902 could not handle the math of 1975, and the new generation of customers did not want to drop coins in a slot. They wanted a drive-through. They wanted a plastic booth. They wanted somebody in a uniform to hand them a bag of food through a window. The wall of glass and the brass dolphins and the marble tables suddenly looked like a museum, and nobody was going to a museum for lunch. The closure started in the 1970s, 1 automat at a time, quietly. The marble was sold to antique dealers. The brass dolphins were pulled off the walls and crated up. The glass windows were boarded over. The chrome paneling was scrapped. And the men and women who had eaten at the automat their whole lives drove past those boarded-up storefronts on their way to McDonald's, and they did not stop, and they did not look, and they tried not to think about it. The last automat closed on April 9th, 1991, 200 East 42nd Street, New York City. The owner stood at the door on the last day and watched the last customers come in. He served them coffee from a dolphin. He let them choose pie from behind a glass door. And when the last customer walked out, he locked the door and turned off the lights, and he said it was the end of an era. He was right. The era he was talking about lasted 89 years, from a German machine that sank in the Atlantic in 1902 to a locked door on East 42nd Street in 1991. 89 years of nickels and brass dolphins and lemon meringue pie behind glass. 89 years of an America that was elegant and democratic and fast and warm all at the same time. An America that has not existed since. The Smithsonian saved a 35-foot section of the original 1902 Philadelphia automat. They knew that what they were preserving was not a restaurant. It was a piece of America that could not be rebuilt. The wall of glass, the brass knobs, the marble, the dolphin. They preserved it because the people who ate at the automat were dying, and the children of those people had never seen one, and the grandchildren had never even heard the word. Somewhere in a museum in Washington, D.C., there is a wall of glass with empty compartments where the pie used to be, and a small sign explaining what it was. People walk past it, and they do not stop because they have no idea what they are looking at. If you ever ate at an automat, tell me which one. If you ever stood in front of that wall of glass with a nickel in your hand and made the most important decision of your week, tell me what you picked. If your father took you to the Times Square automat after a baseball game and let you put the coin in the slot yourself, tell me about it. And if you remember the brass dolphin that poured your coffee, the marble table where you sat, and the woman in the glass booth who counted out your nickels with rubber on her fingers, tell me about her too.